Hello, my name is Barry Horner, and I'm your host on today's episode of Steak and Soul, the podcast that's dedicated to demystifying the world of employee ownership. Stake refers not just to the financial or beneficial ownership, but also the vested interest, the sense of responsibility, and the feeling of belonging that comes with being an employee owner. Soul is all about the company culture, the values, the shared purpose, and the human connection that are amplified and shaped by employee ownership. Soul is the company's silent language. Join me as we sit down with business leaders, dedicated employees, and expert advisors who have successfully navigated their journey to employee ownership, and those who make the EO community thrive every single day. It's my pleasure to welcome Johnny Aisher to the show this morning. Hi, Johnny. Good to have you with me. Johnny is a veteran leader with the John Lewis Partnership, most recently serving as director of the John Lewis Partnership Trust. Johnny's journey with the business began in 1985, and he has served his entire professional life, that's 40 years, navigating the complexities of the UK's largest employee-owned business. From the shop floor to the boardroom, he has served of the partnership way, ensuring that the vision of the founder, John Spedan Lewis, remains relevant in a modern digital-first retail landscape. Whilst many companies are now transitioning to employee ownership, John Lewis is the original blueprint. The transition wasn't just a corporate restructure, it was a radical social experiment that began in 1929. The transition to employee ownership was sparked by Spedan Lewis's realization that he, his father, and his brother earned more than the entire combined staff. He famously remarked that it was wrong to have millionaires before you have ceased to have slums, leading him to transfer his shares into the trust for the benefit of all employees, the partners. With Johnny, he recently retired on the 31st of March, so we're catching him at a pivotal moment in his life and career. So Johnny, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Barry. It's great to be here.
Good. Well, with that just short intro on the John Lewis Partnership, I've always thought I couldn't do a podcast on employee ownership without, in the early days, featuring John Lewis. You know, they are, I guess, the firm when you say, oh, I work for a employee-owned business, they immediately go, what do you mean like John Lewis? So it's totally appropriate. And it's also totally appropriate we have you representing 40 years of the John Lewis Partnership. So it'd be good, I think, for listeners, if we just dug a little bit into the John Lewis story, Johnny, to be honest. So over to you to sort of share a little bit about maybe your journey, when you joined, how you joined, and then just any reflections, I guess, of what you've seen over the last 40 years in such a leading and inspiring business.
Well, thanks, Barry. Let me begin, if I may, with just sort of reiterating your point about how the partnership began. And you quite rightly used the word experiment. And Spedan Lewis, the founder, the son of John Lewis, after whom he named his partnership, was very much a naturalist as well as a businessman. And he likened the founding of the partnership to what a naturalist might do if he found a seed on a beach and you didn't quite know what that seed would become. So you plant it and nurture it, and it grows, and you kind of help it become whatever it's going to be. But it's almost like the essence of that plant is in its seed. And he very much saw this transition to partnership as an experiment to see what would happen if, instead of the traditional model of business, we transferred ownership and the benefit of their hard work to the partners. So we had essentially labour employing capital rather than capital employing labour. And it sounds, and indeed it was a generous act, because he could have, like his father, gone on and become extremely wealthy, but morally felt that wasn't right. He wasn't, like many of those great businessmen, a Quaker or a Christian. He wasn't really a philanthropist, although he did many philanthropic acts. The germ of the idea and the experiment was precisely to see if it would be better for society as a whole. And your point about the millionaires and the slums. He introduces his book with "We're living on a volcano." When the masses realise how wealthy the owners of business are, through the new medium of radio, when they become informed about the disparity in wealth, there will surely be a revolution. So we must do something about it before that happens. The subtitle to his famous book on it, called Fairer Shares, is a possible advance in civilization and perhaps the only alternative to communism. So, so this notion that the society as a whole would be better off if we move down this route is essential to it. And inevitably, that experiment, in a sense, it can never conclude, or unless and until the whole society is EO businesses, which is very unlikely to happen, despite our best efforts. So the comparison with other businesses continues, and the John Lewis story, I think, in that respect, is interesting because, of course, it's not all sunny uplands, but it is 100 years of successful trading, and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who've worked for the partnership and hopefully have, as a result, enjoyed a better life, and Spedan would hope a more prosperous life as a result of that experiment. So, yeah, as you can see, despite having been for nearly a month, I'm still very enthusiastic about the concept. Um, and it was that concept, to be honest, that attracted me. I'd had a privileged education and was studying at university, and had gone from classics into philosophy and theology. So, if you like, my brain was thinking about society and classical societies, the birth of democracy in Athens, and then how it worked in Rome. And here's this business whose glossy graduate brochure talks about democracy and councils and local forums, as well as showing pictures of people singing in choirs and orchestras and yachts and castles on islands in Brownsea Island. And I think this is an extraordinary mixture of a commercial world, and yet one that looks fun and attractive morally. Um, so there were other blue chip offers on the table to join businesses like British Airways or etc., IBM. But the partnership just stood out. And one small aspect in which it stood out at the beginning, and which I think is still true today, was the extraordinary level of courtesy, and that sense of you were joining a family where every member of the family was going to be cared for. And so, right from the beginning, um, the letters that came through, thank you for coming to interview. We'll let you know how you got on in a few days. 3 days later, we're pleased to let you know we'd love to have you back. This correspondence, this relationship, from the very beginning was very attractive. But I was lucky to be the one of those 21 graduates who started in 1985 who did stick with it, and gosh, am I glad that I did. And inevitably, in a large company, there were a number of different career paths which I could follow, and that's exactly what I did.
And what's that journey look like for you, Johnny? Where did you start in terms of departments and things, and how do you progress through an organisation like John Lewis to end up as you did?
Well, we're very traditional, as I think you'd expect, and so all graduates coming into the department store training scheme were sent onto the shop floor, and did a lot of training on how to serve customers, how to count stock, all the stuff that you'd expect. But I suspect we did it for longer than our equivalents might have done in other firms, and it was a couple of years until you took on your first serious managership. And whilst the starting salaries were comparable with other interesting businesses, you sort of realised after a year or two, when other friends had big salary increases and you hadn't, that, oh yes, now retail's not going to make you rich, but hopefully it'll make you happy if the model works. So there was a lot of time on the shop floor at our flagship store in Oxford Street, when we were still closing on Saturday afternoons, because we were a different kind of business, so we could do that if we wanted to. Um, and then through to other smaller stores in London, and a new store we opened in Kingston. And after about 9 or 10 years, our trading pattern in those days was still Tuesday to Saturday. and I was working every Saturday, and the children were beginning to grow up, and I felt I was missing out on that side of their life, and I was looking therefore to transition into a Monday to Friday
Right.
office job.
Right.
And the world of IT opened up for me, and I moved across into that, and very much loved being the interface between the shop floor and the real IT experts as a sort of systems advisor and then a systems manager, and I enjoyed that environment for another 9 or 10 years. But all the while, I had put myself forward and been elected within our system of democracy as a local representative on one of the local councils, and then on as a representative on our central council. And then in the 90s, I was elected to the pensions board, and then towards the end of the 90s, I was elected to the main board. So an increasing part of my week was spent away from the shop floor and then my IT computer, serving in that other aspect, and it had really caught my imagination. And eventually, with the support of my various managers, I was offered a role that meant I could stop absenting myself from my day job and just go and do democracy full time. And that, the, as it then was described, the clerk to the council, that sort of mysterious job type, opened up, and there I spent the next 20 years. It was going to be just 10 years. I was going to do 10 years of that, have my sabbatical, and then come and do a fourth thing and say, if you know, 4 careers of 10 years each. But I got hooked, and I delayed my sabbatical, and I just kept going.
And going back to the early days when you joined the partnership as a grad, how did it feel in terms of day to day? Did it feel like an employee-owned business? Because at that point, I don't think you were calling yourselves partners, were you? I think that came later. Is that correct?
Well, the partner thing wasn't there at the beginning of the partnership, but that did come in quite early on, under Spedan. And in fact, as you mentioned the word, because that is an unusual word, and obviously, it has connotations with being, senior partner in a law firm, etc. And I think I was very lucky with some of my early managers, um, who were very um, quick to prevent you behaving in a way that was non partnership, as we said. They were just, this is different. I don't expect you to ring up on your day off. I know you're in charge of the stock taking, but it's Tuesday. It's your day off today. Leave it with others. But I've got to do. I've got to make it all. No, you know, when you come into work tomorrow, that's when you do it. Um, but also the language was quite important. So not just the word partner. Um, we had business dress rather than uniform. We went up to the dining room rather than the canteen. I mean, little things like that made a difference. And the benefits that were available equally to people of all different ranks, as it were. We were still using the term management and rank and file, so we hadn't quite got as modern as we needed to be. But the language was important, and I think throughout my career, what I felt most differentiated the partnership was the Weekly Gazette, began in 1918, and in there it's Speedon famously wrote out what his aims were. And every week, this magazine appeared in the dining room, and you paid your 2p, and there was a hush whilst everybody flicked through it. And not only were you reading the trading results and various interesting articles about the business or maybe competitor businesses, and at the back there were all the appointments, who was moving where, and the job adverts, which was very important. But the most popular section then and now was the letters column. And Speedon famously, when he started his magazine, said, "I invite any partner to write to the magazine with any comment, any question, any suggestion, any criticism, however serious, and that letter will be responded to by the relevant director. Put your name to your letter, or leave it anonymous as you wish. Really? You, you're going to publish anonymous letters from people being critical of the business and the management? Yes, absolutely. I want to know what people think. When I know what people think, we can have a debate. We can, we can move forward. I suspect successive generations of management have thought, if only we could start again and not not have that aspect. So that, as I said, that has remained in a way inspirational. It's a sort of holding one's feet to the flame every week to do it right, and if we got it wrong, to apologise or explain why we're doing it, and to do it better. And I think in the parts of my career earlier on where perhaps I wasn't being promoted as fast as I wished, or I didn't get on with my manager, and I was a bit depressed and thought, have I really made the right decision? Friends whose salary had doubled and tripled, and I was still bumping along on my little retail package. The magazine would land, and I'd look at it, and I'd look at the statement on the back about the purpose of the partnership, and I go, that's it. That is it. That is why I'm here. Believe, keep the faith. Believe in what we're trying to do, and next week will be better than last week. So that Gazette played a pivotal role in my career.
I'm really keen on our podcast, especially this one, that we look for where the learnings are from John Lewis that could be translated into other EO businesses. Just reflecting on the Gazette, do you think, is that something that was peculiar to either John Lewis or a large employer business? Or do you think we're missing a trick by not having that level of openness and transparency in today's EO businesses? What's your reflections on that?
That's a good question. I'd say there were sort of two related things. I mean, the transparency, that radical transparency, I think is unusual. And to be clear, when the Gazette was published, it wasn't restricted just to partners. I mean, Spedan was keen for others to be able to read how he was doing, because essentially he was trying to prove, look at my sales graph, look at my profits. This method works. And so it was information to be shared publicly. And we don't do that anymore. So we restrict the readership internally for commercial reasons. It became possible to publish a sales graph that showed you that Waitrose in Sudbury was struggling, and M&S would then swoop in and buy the site opposite, and that'd be curtains for, or not, but it was too sensitive. So there's a transparency issue, which I think is important, and I think it is tougher today because of the inability to retain information internally. But I think the sharing of information is critical to that democratic participation, and I think that is a harder and harder thing to do in a world where we're drowning in information and methods to share information with others, and those sort of halcyon days when you had a magazine once a week in front of you at your coffee break. I know people don't even remember what coffee breaks are nowadays in retail, but that was a very privileged environment. How you communicate with the same effectiveness to a workforce today, I think is a huge challenge. But I think unless you are prepared to meet that one head on, the engagement will hugely suffer.
Yeah. In the Gazette, you mentioned that some financial information is published, but clearly some sensitivity is required there. And again, it's something that I think a lot of employee-owned businesses look to, the whole information influence and reward. And if you genuinely want people to feel like they are a beneficial owner in a business, you need to give them relevant information. So if I do this is the likely impact on the business, and it can all drop to the bottom line, and therefore we all participate in an employee-owned business. How tangible in a large business like John Lewis is that link between what I do today could translate into a profit down the line of which I'm going to be a beneficiary. And maybe at the same time, we can just talk about, it's well reported that John Lewis have gone through some challenging times of late and only recently restored the levels of profitability. So a couple of questions there, really. How has information been imparted to partners sensitively, and what level of sort of granularity do you provide? And then sort of second point really is around, because again, I'm really keen on the podcast that it's sort of warts and all. It's great if profits are doing unbelievably well, everybody's benefiting, but inevitably we're going through, it's a difficult time economically for a lot of businesses, and inevitably there'll be readers of this podcast, listeners to the podcast, thinking, well, it's all right for some businesses, but it doesn't look like we're going to do a profit share for this year. How do you manage your way through that?
Well, you're absolutely right to allude to the ups and downs, and in a way, those ups and downs are not for us recent. They were there right at the very beginning, and I think at the beginning, when the profit share was promised by Spedan to his workers, his employees, his partners, uh, as he then called them, when he got to the end of the year and they made a profit, he then said, "I can't share it. I need the capital. I'm really sorry. Bear with me." And that happened for a couple of years, and it was like, I'll write you a share promise, and they were, what's all this share promise stuff? You said one thing, you're doing another. But his charisma and the fact that there was profit sort of carried them through to that first profit distribution. But then we had the depression, we had the war, we lost our main shop, which bombed in Oxford Street in 1940. It took 20 years to rebuild it. I mean, there was a very tough time, the Korean War, and no bonuses for 5 or 6 years. But even then, I think that wasn't unusual in the post-war period, and so there was, we were sort of carried along by the fact that everybody was struggling. The more recent struggles, I think, and our dip in profitability has really highlighted the need to convey that long-term ambition. And I think if I'm honest, as the business has grown, that has become increasingly our challenge. Um, the model of partnership, very much based on a handshake after your apprenticeship and a commitment to remain with the business and the business to remain with you for the rest of your career if you so wish. And whilst you're growing, that is more possible. But as the world moves to 24/7 and the workforce is increasingly part-time, and then as the business has retracted during COVID, we were forced to make some tough decisions and close a number of branches. The right decision, but incredibly painful. So sort of the magic slightly seeped away. So the long-term commitment, we can't necessarily offer that, and we've got to be really clear what it is we're offering instead. And the bonuses fell away for 3 or 4 years. They'll come back. They'll come back if we stick to the plan. It's a good plan, and we can see it working. But if you're in it just for a couple of years, if you're passing through, if you're, it's what's so special? It's hard work. There's no bonus, and there's no kind of job for life promise. Not that I'm interested in that anyway, as a student. But the kind of what is on offer is different now from when I joined. The silver lining to that, I hope, is that you kind of have to make every day count for every partner, and that focuses on the relationships you have at work, the feeling that you're contributing to something really worthwhile. The business itself, what it's doing, its mission, it means something to you, and that you're happy to contribute just on a short term basis without necessarily feeling I need that long term promise. Um, it's not that you're not doing it for money. Of course, you're doing it for money. Of course, we need to pay the relevant wage. But you're sort of, in the recent few years, you're not doing it because of a fat bonus at the end of the year. So what is it that hooks you in? What is it that makes you excited about working in Waitrose in tough times? Uh, and as I say, it's a silver lining because it's forced us to look really carefully about what working together means, and it's not just taking home a bonus check at the end of the year.
And what level of information is imparted based on what you said earlier? You've got to be particularly sensitive to potentially the competition picking up that information. But as a partner, what do I get, or is it a lot of it kept behind the scenes until the day of the big reveal when here's the profit share and is the one or isn't the one? How has that progressed over the period you've been at John Lewis?
Oh, it's got a lot more complicated, Barry, unfortunately. I mean, retail's at one level not terribly complicated as a business model. You buy stuff, bring it in, and put a margin on and sell it. And so for a lot of my career, the information that we shared was purely the sales graph because stuff fell through to the bottom line. We weren't radically changing the business. The margins were relatively secure, and you could see that you were beating last year. You could see that the golden quarter, particularly in department stores, October onwards through to the beginning of January, that mountain of sale graph you had to climb. Um, if you beat last year, if your sales were up, that's what you needed to know. Uh, and on the shop floor, when I was selling my linens, my electricals, my carpets, um, it wasn't my job as the manager, particularly to concern myself with which lines were more profitable than others. That was the job of the buyer. What we had to make sure is we matched the customer's expectations, and we saw what was right for the customer. So we weren't in those days overly concerned with the profitability of the products we were selling. Our mission was to sell and to beat last year's figures and to achieve our budget. Nowadays, however, it's not that simple because you can't encourage 75,000 people to beat last year's sales target and then tell them that profits have gone down without some explanation. So we do. It was monthly. We've gone to quarterly podcasts with the FD, which are available on the intranet, and we do bring people very much up to speed with the position as we go through the year. Uh, but you're still left with big end of year adjustments, aren't you? And huge decisions and write-offs that impact that position. Um, and just to sort of complete the what information do we share, because it was an interesting experiment last year, having not paid the bonus for a couple of years, the board took an unusual decision of putting a figure out there and said if we achieve uh, a figure of was it 200 million? It's so long ago that I was working there. If we achieve this figure, then we will be recommending to the board to pay a bonus. We didn't hit that figure. Things went against us with that late budget in November, and we fell short of that. And we had a lot of partners worried that that would mean no bonus. It didn't in the end because it was just there may be other factors, but this setting a target means you're taking partners into your calculations. They then want to know more about, well, what enables you to pay a bonus on that level of profitability? What are the other factors? Um, and I think one of the ways in which we have sort of navigated that challenge of you can't share everything, but you've got to clearly share something, is through our democratic channels. So within the context of the meeting of the Partnership Council, you can offer a transparency because you're in the room together that you cannot offer through the medium of the Gazette or even through a podcast that's got contained viewability. And so, if we get it right, then in those meetings, centrally at the Partnership Council and locally in our forum meetings, the leader can take a representative group through with a level of transparency that one one couldn't do to the whole workforce.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. That probably takes us to a bit of a conversation around governance. And I guess just thinking about those listening to the podcast, clearly the governance of John Lewis is very different to the governance of Paradigm Norton or the employee-owned business over the road in our business park. But what is the governance structure that you've been a fundamental part of over certainly last 2 decades? And is there any areas of learning there where you think actually that works really well and would translate into a smaller EO business? So, we when we became employee owned, we suddenly found this succession model that we thought, wow, this is amazing. So we probably, in hindsight, put too many people on the trust board in our quest. We didn't want it to feel like this is just lip service. We really wanted to genuinely embed employee ownership in the business, but realized that that was too big and unwieldy. And what we really needed was a smaller, nimble trust board. And we created Partner Voice, which maybe is the equivalent of the council. And that seems to be working much better. So Partner Voice, the idea there is that we hear across the 3 offices, we hear across the different, albeit we're a pretty flat structure, but we hear across all the areas of the business. They get fed up and processed and get fed to Exco or board. So just thinking about the JL model, what is the sort of broad governance structure and what are the learnings there of what's worked well for other EO businesses?
Well, we've evolved over time the levels at which we elect people to represent their partners. But the fundamental structure has remained the same since the foundation at the very beginning. And that is a tripartite governance, whereby you have a very powerful CEO chairman, and we combine the roles and have done for all but 2 years, I think, of the partnership's history. So I still think of it as Spedan Lewis is still running the business in the form of our chairman CEO. Stewarding the finances is the board, as in any other PLC, and over time that fiduciary role of the board has grown, so it's more than just stewarding the finances, as people realise. And then the third governing authority is the elected council. And I mean, what fascinated me from the beginning, and I think is still really important, is the those 3 governing authorities we describe them as equal. Now, they're not equal in the role, clearly, but they're equal in importance. And as the representative of the partners, the Partnership Council has some important governance powers, not least to sack the chairman, to receive the chairman's report every year, to elect directors to the trust board and to the main board, and indeed to the pensions board, and have the right to make recommendations to the chairman and to the board, and recommendations to the chairman cannot be rejected by the chairman without consultation of the board. So you've got these 3 governing authorities of sort of equal weight, but not equal in role. And the real challenge, I think, is this is not overselling what the role of the council is. Not I'm being clear about the distinction in different types of power. And I mean, I think there are 3 types of power which we have. One is the power of absolute command, which sometimes one might equate to the power of the purse. That you, if you've got the money, you can spend it. You've got more power than someone else who hasn't. Then there's a kind of delegated power. So where formal power is delegated to the council to do things, absolutely, that's the council's right, and that cannot be changed. And it's enshrined in our written constitution. And those 2 powers are important, but the more common and perhaps most important power is the power of influence. And the council's ability, through its discussions and debates, as you were just saying, to voice what partners are feeling, that in the end is more powerful than any delegated power or the ability to sack the chairman, which hopefully never happens. But when you write it down, it doesn't sort of cut the mustard in the same way. Now, what can we do, Johnny? What are our powers? Well, you can have discussions. Yeah. What can we actually do? And so it is important to have, I think, some of that power of the purse. And Spedan Lewis recognised that right at the beginning and said, I want the council to have a budget of its own and to spend it in whatever way it wants to spend it. And that will help partners realise that, I mean what I say, it's just your business, it's your money, you spend it. Now, it's not spending it on business projects, it's spending it on benefits and leisure projects, possibly giving to charity, looking after retired partners. And those are things, which the management quite rightly is saying, well, it's your business, how do you want to do it? But it makes a real difference, that power of influence.
Yeah. But with that model you've just described with the three different governance bodies, I was just thinking about, again, other EO businesses. Is there any tips, thoughts about how you successfully get those three different parts of the governance structure? But at the end of the day, they all want the same thing. They all want the business to flourish, to have happy partners. Are there any things that you've done within John Lewis that we should be, as other smaller EO businesses, thinking about in terms of meeting rhythm, cadence, communication? What makes the John Lewis model of those three bodies so successful, and what have you learned over the years that could be translated into other smaller EO businesses?
I think probably I would, inevitably based on my career, I mean the meetings of the board are of a cadence that's perhaps no different from any other board meeting, although probably met more frequently during COVID, as all businesses did. And a director of the board would probably say there's 2 or 3 times as much work as there was 20 years ago. And we're finding that when we're electing directors from the council and setting out the role profile, where it's no longer 12 meetings a year and a bit of private research. It's a lot more than that, and we make time for people to do that. But from the point of view of the council as a governing authority and the cadence of those meetings, I think there is a sort of natural rhythm which comes by meeting every couple of months. And I say every couple of months because the way our meetings have developed, as the business has become more complicated and has become larger, we found that meeting for an afternoon no longer gives us enough time to cover the business that we need to cover. And with the benefit of one of our hotels, which also has a conference centre, the council now typically meets with an overnight. And that enables us to prepare informally, gather views, hear committee reports, perhaps include briefings on various different topics on the first day, have that sort of that downtime over dinner and in the bar afterwards. And then the more formal meeting, we're joined by the board on the second day, open to visitors. So, very popular day out, if you like, for partners to come and see democracy in action, rub shoulders with the board and the directors, and see that debate going on, and occasionally proposals, votes, changes to the constitution, changes to the way we do our pay policy, or even very importantly, 3 or 4 years ago, changing the wording of the purpose of the partnership. That's happening live in the council chamber. And so with a body of people, in our case, 60, shrinking to 50, now down to sort of in the mid 40s, to get that to work really efficiently, we found that sort of 24 hours together every couple of months works well. But it's costly. I mean, not beat around the bush. It's costly. Um, but with the size of our business, if you're going to gather view and gather them efficiently, we found that's necessary. What we've also developed in the last 20 years is the term of office used to be a year. The business, year was followed by elections, elections to the board, election to the trustee board. That then went to 2 years. It's now 3 years, and that 3 year cycle increasingly is necessary to help councillors really get their heads around the role, around the business, and for the committees to grow and flourish over that period of time. So that's quite a big investment, but that 3 year period I think has been really helpful.
In terms of recruiting, I can't remember quite the word you use, of people onto the council. I guess you've got a really careful balance here, and it's something we're looking at the moment around. You want to be as open and democratic as possible, but at the same time, you need people on the council, or in our case, partner voice, or on the trust board, who sort of understand how the business works and understand sort of business language. How have you navigated that one? Is there now quite a clear job role in terms of what's required for the council, and does that therefore realistically mean that a number of partners are not eligible to be on the council?
Oh, this is the crux of the matter when it comes to democratic participation. I'm so glad you asked about this, because I have found this a real struggle, if I'm honest, in recent years, as the business has become more complicated. And I think there is a temptation, as you've just described, to feel that that governing body needs to be sufficiently equipped to have those debates about the running of the business. Um, and I think what I would say in response is one's got to be really careful to delineate the responsibilities of the board, in our case, with the responsibilities of the council. So maybe that our model is slightly different in that respect, and that it's at the board that those business discussions absolutely need to happen. The temptation is for the council to want to get more involved in those. Why not? We've just been elected as a representative. You keep banging on about being a co-owner, Johnny, and now I'm on the council. It's so exciting. I've been voted in by 3,000 people, and here I am. There's the board director. There's the chairman. What do I do? Let me talk about profitability. Hang on. If we go down that route, then exactly as you said, Barry, we're going to have too many partners saying, well, it's not for me. I couldn't possibly be a councillor. And the real power of the council, it seems to me, is that it properly and completely reflects the views of all partners. And if the majority of partners are not business folk and are working on the shop floor, that view needs to be reflected, and reflected accurately by, if you like, by one of them, by somebody whom they trust. Now, it may be that they all trust a manager in their region, because they've worked with them, and they seem to be articulate. So let's send that manager off to the council. But it may equally be that they say, no, we want to elect somebody who works on the shop floor, who sits on the till, or who works in the warehouse. Only by electing somebody like us will our view properly be reflected. So I've, as a trustee of the partnership, when we're responsible for setting constituencies, I think I've tried to make it my mission to keep the council as properly reflective of the views of partners as possible, for partners to feel that it's their governing authority. It's not a sort of shadow board. It's not a management think tank. Useful though that is, I mean, fantastic to have 45 people additionally looking over your business plan and suggesting improvements. Great. Well, that's not democracy. That's, for me, that's not what the council truly is. And it's back to that. What power do you want? If you want the power of influence, then the best way you can influence is be authentic. And that will often mean electing partners who are non-management, because most of the partnership is non-management. So that's quite a difficult path to tread.
And how do you go about that in terms of process with those that are on the council? Is it done by way of you have someone who is just working on the shop floor, stepping away, and therefore that creates a vacancy within the council for someone to join? Do you almost sort of set different criteria according to who's coming on and off? Is that how you manage the democracy versus the getting that representation on the board? Is that the best way to do it?
So each branch, each unit will elect a representative.
I was just thinking, if you've got a big group and you're trying to avoid, you want to have as democratic sort of voting and elections and people coming onto the group as possible. And if you've got different constituencies, as you say, and then I guess you want to avoid this sort of cliff edge where you lose lots of people at one go. So people come on and off at the same time. So if I took another example of a board I've been on, which was a financial planning worldwide standards board, there may have been a time when maybe I step away from the board, and what they now need is a sort of European accountant with this skill set. And so they go out for that because I've dropped off the board. And I was thinking, is that the way that you've managed that process? Because for us, it's a very live conversation we're having here about, we genuinely want to hear from everyone in the business, but at the same time, we don't want to bring people, very much onto the trust board where they immediately feel out of their depth or they don't feel they're adding. And I think it's just how you navigate that process. That was what I was digging into a little.
Oh, that's interesting, Barry. It's a very live conversation with us as well.
Right.
And there are differing views on this. The 3-year cycle, as you say, does bring with it that risk that let's take our main board. Our main board includes 3 directors elected by the council, and those elections happen every 3 years, and the 3 directors choose whether to stand again or not. And there is the risk that all 3 disappear, and you've got a loss of continuity. I don't think it's ever happened. It used to be 5 directors, and certainly when you were electing every year, there was a chance that 3 or 4 or even 5 would be re-elected. When elections are every 3 years, and people maybe feel, I've done my term or a couple of terms, there is that risk. And it sounds a bit glib. My answer to all the risks is, well, educate the electorate, and let them decide whether they want complete fresh set of 3 or they want some continuity. But in order to get the kind of right representative mix, we've recognised that with a smaller council, you might just end up with not enough young people or not enough people of the right gender. You might not get the right mix. So we allow the president to appoint up to 10% to get that balance right. And it's typically, in our business, it's typically young people. And that view is so important, but they're not standing for office at the beginning of their career.
Sure. And do you I guess because there's so much history there, you would be able to say to a council member, realistically, this is what it means to be on the council in terms of hours committed in a year, and then that's then factored into their sort of job description that they need to attend those meetings and things.
Yes, and as the role has become more time consuming, we have had to create a system of backfill and payment to the branches where they've stepped away from a role. But inevitably, that's harder to do for managers stepping away. If a driver's absent, someone else drives the lorry. Job done. It is tougher for managers. But for all councillors, despite our best efforts to describe as accurately as we can the number of days involved, I think we say it's something like 2 days a month. When you've added together the formal council meetings, each councillor is now a member of a committee as well, and then local constituency meetings and attending a regional forum. Even if you correctly say that will take up 24 days of your diary, people get very excited about being on the council. So they want to do more. They want to meet up with others in their region. That's fantastic. and to some extent, they must do that in their own time. And then they're keen to read papers and can we see a copy of this? And so the most common complaint I've had over my time as council manager is, Johnny, you didn't explain to us far more than you said. Right, that's up to you, you know, you know. So it's a nice problem to have, but it's yeah, it's one's got to be careful to not describe it.
That's really helpful, Johnny. Thank you so much. There's some real takeaways, I think, for smaller businesses there in terms of just the whole process you've gone through. Well, one final question just on governance before we leave that, and I guess is probably maybe one of the most difficult and challenging decisions that the governance of John Lewis had to make, was that whole discussion, which was widely reported around external investment. How was that processed? And yeah, any sort of learnings for other EO businesses around how you take a particularly tricky, thorny issue and process it and come out to the benefit of hopefully most parties? Just any learnings through that difficult decision that you had to make and navigate?
That was indeed sort of one of the trickiest episodes for us as a business, I would say, and in my experience as a director of the trustee board. And it, in a way, it was one of the bravest moves, I thought, of our chairman at the time, to be so open with the council. You know, the partnership was facing difficulties of such a magnitude that if we were not able to raise the necessary capital, then logically, you know, the one possible solution would be the unthinkable. And of course, as soon as the words were out of her mouth, the response was, "Yes, it's unthinkable." You know, and so there was a lot of emotional reaction to that. And in a way, the council's reaction was, well, as I just said, that's unthinkable. That's not doable. You know, you can't seriously come to us with that as a proposition. Now, it wouldn't have been a council decision. The council would have had lots of things to say about it had we developed it into a serious proposal. But the formal decision for such a radical step would have sat with the trustee board. And the trustee board, by definition, is not the council. It's a much smaller group, of which, as you said at the beginning, I was one of the elected trustee directors. 3 of us there, alongside the chairman and the deputy. So taking that trustee board right into the detail of what was being proposed was the key to taking us forward. But it's not frightening the council or frightening partners, because people were worried, but it's what's the appropriate level of communication. And I think what we realised at that point was that those elected to the trustee board, they absolutely needed the necessary training and business knowledge and legal advice to be ready to make such a decision should it happen. And that was a level of expertise to which we had not previously raised those elected representatives, because our focus for those representatives too, as it was for the council, had been very much any partner can stand. The power of this model is that at all elected levels, you've got kind of ordinary partners who do not need to have superior business knowledge. They absolutely need to have the partnership ethos at their heart, and that's something entirely different. But in this instance, we found, oh no, it's more than that. These trustee directors, they absolutely need the legal advice, the business understanding, and that suddenly was a very big ask. And I'm not sure the council at the time of electing those trustees, well, how could it know that they would be elected to that level? So it's a sort of, I suppose, whenever you're electing someone to a position on a board which includes some powers in extremis, you've got to be thinking, you know, there might just be a situation where my representative's going to have to step up and do that. You know, am I confident in that representative?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. A couple of times you've mentioned, Johnny, that you, in the early days, you sort of looked over your shoulder and some of the people that had joined some of the other businesses, it's like, and you maybe alluded to the fact that it was retail rather than something else. I'm thinking of pay in particular. And I don't know whether their comment was a pay one or because, again, as we were just briefly chatting ahead of the podcast, we were talking about some of the challenges of employee ownership. And I think for some employee-owned businesses where they bring in a new CEO or leadership in an employee-owned business where they had also the opportunity to maybe join a non-EO business with all sorts of benefits and long-term incentive plans and things. Do you think that's held back the business over time? Or maybe a better question is sort of how have you navigated that one where you've wanted to bring in really top flight board senior leaders, but you're not also able to say, yeah, and you can have a ton of stock at the same time. How have you navigated that one? Because I think it is, for some EO businesses, it's a question that I often get asked. And, we've looked in part where we're hybrid, so we're 80% employee owned, and we have had EMI in place. And that's our way of that sort of squaring that circle. But I just wondered in John Lewis how you've managed to bring in clearly excellent people who have guided and led the business over many decades, where you're not able to maybe offer them the same in totality, the same package as they might have got elsewhere.
Let's not pretend that there's an easy answer to this one. um, I think for a large part of our history, we've been fortunate in developing talent from within. And for most of my career, we saw people who'd been with the partnership a long time reaching those senior positions. And I think if you've been with the partnership for a long time, then by definition you've bought into the model and Speedan's very clear statements about sufficient profit and sufficient salary. Um, I think his sort of famous comparison is that nobody really needed to have more than a senior judge to live comfortably. Now, that's that may not be yes. They're sort of really worthy people in society, and they're wise and they're relatively comfortable. And that's enough. And we have over time had senior leaders who've been asked that question and responded, what I earn is a lot of money. For me, that's enough, and that's fine if you've sort of grown up in the partnership. You've accepted that we're doing something different, and hopefully you've also bought into the millionaires and the slums bit. So yes, it is a bit of a sort of moral position. Where you're bringing people in, though, absolutely, Barry, I agree that is an increasing challenge, and salaries are capped by the constitution. The highest paid may not earn more than 75 times the average of non-management partners. Still a lot of money. Uh, but you're not going to be in the several millions, um, and so a bit like how do you engage partners when they're not receiving any bonus at all? And we keep going on about what a wonderful thing co-ownership is, and it I guess it has to be the culture of the business. It has to be what it feels like. It has to be the people you're working with, and it has to be the sense of this is a really worthwhile business. I want to be part of this kind of mission almost, um, and it's got to be fun. The bit that the bit that we kind of seem to have lost a bit as inevitably during COVID, and oh, it's a lot of hard work. You've got to, it's your life.
Mm.
You've got to make it fun.
Mm.
But yes, I'm not trying to gloss over the
No,
fact
sure.
that sometimes we've had people who we might have liked to recruit at a very senior level, and we've just not been able to. But still, we've still been lucky that we've had. I mean, our current chairman, um, a long and successful career with Tesco. Right at the top, almost at an age where a person might choose to retire. There's this one job in retail that's just come up: chairmanship of the John Lewis Partnership. Yeah, I'll give that a go. I'll give that a go. And it's not that not doing it for the money, but it, you know, could have gone on to do something else. I suspect much more lucrative. But there's still enough magic in what this sort of employee ownership thing means that attracts the right person.
Yeah, brilliant. Um, in terms of just thinking about not necessarily pay, but leaders in the business, what's been the sort of, I guess, the culture of, so the sort of theme of Stake and Soul, Stake being the sort of ownership side, Soul being more the culture of the business. Do you specifically, there must be people that you recruit into John Lewis who you just think they are just so a John Lewis employee culturally through and through. How do you find those people when you're recruiting into John Lewis? What's the sort of process you go through? It maybe isn't your area, so it may be one where you can't answer. But I just thought, when I go into my local John Lewis in Bristol, there just seems a sort of caring attitude, a willingness to go the extra mile. I don't know how that feeds through from the top. Maybe maybe that is the culture, that it feeds through from the senior leadership through to the regional managers to the managers to the shop floor. But how do you go about finding the right people that are going to slot into John Lewis and flourish?
Um, you're right. It's not my specialist area, and it, it is a difficult one. I'm sure there are. I mean, I know there are. As there are with all businesses, some quite increasingly clever psychometric tests, aren't there? So you can just sense that there's someone who. I mean, it always risks sounding a bit religious, doesn't it? But the sort of servant leadership thing. I mean, that is such a key ingredient. Seems to be in the EO world. Um, that you've got to you've got to sniff that out. Um, I mean, there is an apprenticeship period, uh, and one's got to be quite rigorous about that. But typically, that's not so much the case for the top level, where one doesn't want to make that mistake and be saying goodbye to someone after the 90-day apprenticeship period. Um, so I mean, I suspect it's something I'm not going to give you a very coherent answer on, but I mean, you're absolutely right that it's so expensive if you don't get that right, and it's partly why developing the internal pipeline, in a sense, is a more secure route. Um, and that's just been less the case as our business has expanded into new areas, and we've had to bring in expertise from elsewhere. And I think, if I'm honest, that's also been where we've seen a larger turnover, because that challenge, getting it absolutely right in an area which is new to us. And we've got to acknowledge that the kind of sort of person I was, looking for something for the whole of my career, it's just not the way of life for many people. People love to work for the partnership for 5 years as part of my career, and I'm going, oh no, that's not what the partnership's all about. If you're joining, you're joining. You got to we've got to get it right and make you stay. No, I don't want to stay. I happily do 5 years. Oh, does that make you a true partner or not? I need to go away and think about that.
Really interesting, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. And that takes us in a lovely sort of loop back to you, really, Johnny. And clearly, it's a pivotal time in your period. If you were to just reflect back on the JL you joined 40 years ago and the JL of now, where are the consistencies, and where is it, oh my goodness, I can hardly recognize the business of 40 years ago? What are the sort of, the common themes that have continued through that 40-year journey, and then the marked differences that you now see?
Um, well, as I alluded, well, not as I said earlier on, I mean, the governance structure is still the same. So the way we describe the business, the way we run the business, the way we elect people, the centrality of our representatives being elected, and any partner being able to stand and sit on the board or sit on the trustee board. Um, those things I still find extraordinary, and it was been brilliant that I was able to be part of that. Um, but what is so different everywhere, isn't it? But it affects us particularly. Um, is the poor reputation that democracy has. When we look at the world, when we look at countries and leaders, um, and it's not attractive. And what for centuries almost has been the foundation of society and the way we're governed. It's just doesn't look good. Um, and so we found that keeping people engaged is just harder than ever before. And I think um, that has been combined in our business with the 24/7 culture. So for me, that's the biggest difference. With that a team that work 5 days a week, shut on Sundays, shut on Mondays, and then gathered again on Tuesday morning, largely full timers working together. In that environment, you can create the family feel. You can promulgate the message and the mission. That has become over the last 20 years so much harder. The 24/7 culture, with part timers being the predominant workforce rather than full timers, um, keeping that family feel. We no longer have the annual partnership games in some big country park. It's a knockout time. We can't do that. We still run the football tournament, the cricket tournament. But it's very hard to get people together. Um, so being that united family, and it sort of brings me back to the Gazette, if you like. The weekly communication, the weekly you're all in this together. That's more important than ever before. But yeah, it's society is very very challenging, and being democratic is not the solution that everyone's looking for, sadly.
What do you think you'll most miss as you sort of look back and reflect? Were there any projects that were ongoing that you thought, oh, if I could have just stayed for another year to see that one through, or is your sort of reflection, I've done 40 years, I've done my time, and it's now ready for new things?
Oh, I hope I'm in that latter category. But I was very fortunate to go part time towards the end. So I had 3 years of working part time and in a job share, and I sort of feel that that's allowed me to avoid the kind of cliff edge uh, that so many face, stepping away from a sort of senior committed role. Uh, but I will miss people asking me all the time what a word really means, or what do we used to do 20, 30 years ago. I mean, the sort of being consulted on things, and I think I'll most miss the huge enjoyment that one would see partners derive from being elected to and being a part of that governance structure. Sometimes people were new to the business, sometimes people who'd worked there 20, 30 years, and they come and they sit in the council, and they they say, Johnny, this is just the best part of my week, of my month. It's so enjoyable, and you think, oh, I'm really pleased to have been a part of making your career really enjoyable, and fostering that, developing new representatives, and seeing people step up then onto the board or the trustee board. I mean, that's a very privileged role to have had, and I shall miss that.
Super. We have a tradition towards the end of the podcast of just a few questions that I ask every guest. The first one is, finish the sentence. Employee ownership is
The only thing I've ever known.
absolutely
But
right.
I mean, is a better way of doing business. I mean, it's got to be that, hasn't it?
My biggest EO surprise was
How long it took me as an individual to get fully into it.
interesting. Okay,
So if I look back at my career in the beginning, why was I not as enthusiastic as I am now? I love working with John Lewis, but I wasn't an employee owner. I was a keen graduate doing my job. You know, why did it take so long? And why do others take so long
So when
sometimes?
did what was the catalyst for when the penny dropped? Or was it just a gradual realization of the value, I guess, of employee ownership?
Um, I think it was being appointed to a committee by the president of the council. There was a like, oh right, oh yes, this they really do want to know what I think, and I've now got this position of democratic responsibility. And there probably was a gradual bit as well, but the it took longer than in retrospect, it took longer than I thought.
Right. One book every aspiring owner should read, or just business book. I've sort of broadened it out beyond employee ownership because there's not all that many employee ownership books out there. But has there, in your career, Johnny, of 40 years, have there been any particularly inspirational business books that you've read that have been a sort of light bulb moment for you? That may not be the case, but I just wondered if there was anything that you could share that other people could think, actually, that sounds really good. I'll dig into that one.
Well, it sounds a bit sad, Barry, but the book that changed it for me was actually Job Ownership, the Robert Oakeshott book. And the reason that's sad is because I've been in the partnership for, I forget what it was, 10 or 15 years. I had not realized about the world outside, the employee ownership world outside, and I was invited to go to the book launch. And one of our senior directors was due to speak at that book launch and couldn't go and said, "Oh, Johnny, would you go in my place? You're elected to the board and etc." I read the whole book and gave far too long a talk. I was so excited by it. So it's not a it's not a new book, but it for me it was the foundation of then the sort of subsequent years of wanting to help be part of that world. Um, it's not quite a book, Barry, and it's a bit like Desert Island Discs. You've had your choice, so you can't have another one. But I do encourage people to read the John Lewis Partnership Constitution uh, because I mean it's only sort of 30 pages. It takes about 40 minutes. I do think it encapsulates something about employee ownership that really can be helpful to other businesses, just in terms of the way it's structured, in terms of the things that we felt were important to enshrine in a document such as that. So I mean, I would happily encourage people to
Um,
ask for a.
and where's the best place to find that? Is it just a quick Google, or is it on the John Lewis website? What's
I think it is on the John Lewis website.
okay?
But if one wanted a hard copy, you just contact the Public Affairs Department,
Okay,
and they will.
we'll do a bit of digging on that and put a link into the show notes in terms of how
Yeah,
people might
yeah,
access that one
yeah.
and Robert's book as well. Well, one final question, and you have a bit of choice here, Johnny. So um, it's an opportunity to share something. So a moment of honesty, a time when you made a significant mistake, for example, or a decision you regret. So that's the moment of honesty. An unfiltered story. So that could be tell a story about a difficult setback for you or John Lewis, a time when you had to fire someone you like. And then the third one is a secret struggle. That could be, it's interesting. A number of people have shared imposter syndrome. I've interviewed quite a few CEOs of businesses that have been very successful EO businesses. And it's almost like I've no idea how I managed to navigate my way through the whole thing. So a moment of honesty, an unfiltered story, or a secret struggle. Is there anything that particularly springs to mind?
Well, there was imposter syndrome, of course there was, but particularly at my retirement, where, as I mentioned to you before we started, suddenly people were saying all these things. And I don't know this is common to many retirement parties, but um, so there was definitely that feeling of imposter syndrome. Have I really done all those things that people seem to think are important? But I would, in a sense, a secret struggle um, is as I've gone through the partnership, and I mentioned servant leadership earlier on, and the risk that it sounds a bit religious. But I think what I have struggled with personally is to keep that balance between my own personal beliefs and the world of work. And yet, a lot of what the partnership is about, a lot of what it's trying to do in changing society, a lot of the way in which you lead, seems to me to be not dissimilar to a lot of the stuff I hear in church on a Sunday. And yet, if I turn up to work on a Monday and say, "Oh, I had a really interesting time in church," that's not going to appeal to many people. So there is this kind of has been a bit of a struggle all the way along, keeping those two parts of my life separate. And yet, for me as an individual, those two things are what makes me me. Um, so it's not quite the same as balancing work and home, time wise. Although that's a struggle I'm sure many have. But this sort of how far can you go in bringing your own personal, in this case, religious beliefs into your day at work? So that might be slightly different from what many people have had a struggle with.
No,
um,
thank you for that. I mean, that's your preparedness to share your honesty there, and for the whole podcast. I think as I was preparing for this and thinking about how different, sorry, John Lewis is to your typical EO business, but actually, as I dug into the thinking behind typically the sort of questions I ask around motivation and culture and what have you, the answers you've given have been enormously helpful, I'm sure, to lots of businesses that are either in the early stages of employee ownership, seeking to sort of navigate that quite tricky path, or for those vendors out there looking at options. And I think I'm really keen, as we chatted earlier, to present a warts and all, and you've absolutely done that, talking about the difficult decisions that John Lewis had to go through, but also things that have been maintained through that 40-year journey and haven't wavered, or sticking to the sort of governance principles of when the business was first set up. So I think people will find it a really inspirational, helpful podcast. So I'm just so appreciative of your time and your preparedness to share your 40-year journey at this particularly pivotal point in your career.
Well, it's very kind of you, Barry. And I was thinking also back to when the founder retired from the John Lewis Partnership. He really struggled. He handed it over. And this sort of, I don't know if this is relevant for people who are thinking about handing their own business over. He really struggled. He felt his successor was mucking it up. He wanted to come back. He wanted to take over a page of the weekly magazine and explain all the. And I think he probably died a very disappointed man. So I probably shouldn't share that because it might not be inspirational to other business owners. But partly because very few people had followed the model. It took a long time for the thing to catch, and it was certainly after Speedan's day. Fortunately, the world is now changing. But I think he found retirement very hard, and he was probably disappointed. And so I hope that if we ever get to heaven and meet, I'll be able to tell him, look, and all while after you were around, things picked up, and the seeds that you sowed, they really have borne fruit. Your experiment has succeeded.
Absolutely,
And to be
absolutely
incredibly proud.
brilliant.
But thank you, Barry.
No, thank you so much, Johnny.